this. It has a tooth in this part of the jaw. No other animal actually has this, and we see it in the tiny juveniles, in these, the subadults, and the adults. So we can be really quite confident that it's actually a single species. So, if we put that all together, we now have aggregations of Protoceratops as very young animals, as these kind of intermediate-sized young animals, as subadults, and adults. While the exact circumstances of any of these are open to interpretation, you don't want to try and over-interpret every single specimen, it does appear reasonable to say that groups of Protoceratops were forming, and they were spending at least some part of their lives together in groups, everything from kind of hatchling size right the way through to late-stage adults. It was very common for them to form groups. And wonderfully for us, these are all from the same time, geologically, and almost all exactly the same place as well. These are about as close to each other as we're ever going to get in terms of a true population when it comes to the fossil record. Often we're picking data from specimens that are found thousands of miles apart, and possibly tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years apart, whereas here they're actually very close together in time and place. And there, as I say, is the 4 different size categories that we have now, and it really does fit this really quite nice pattern of tiny animals right the way through to large adults. So, we've got some new aggregations, and that's lovely. And indeed, dinosaurs are actually known in groups of all adult animals, as we've just seen, of all juvenile animals, as we've just seen, and mixtures of juveniles and adults together. If we look across all dinosaurs, we can find all these different kind of groups. Now, interestingly, juveniles actually only make up about 5% of the fossil record for dinosaurs. If you go out and dig out 20 new skeletons, on average, only about 1 of them will actually be of a juvenile animal, so younger than sub-adult. But all juvenile groups, in other words, groups that consist entirely of juvenile animals, make up about half the total number of aggregations known. So even though juvenile dinosaurs are 1 animal in 20, if you go and find a group, about half of them, on average, will probably be of all juveniles. So, where are the rest of the juveniles, and why this discrepancy between solitary specimens and groups of specimens? Well, there's some interesting aspects to the biology here. Groups of adults will come together for a number of reasons. They'll come together for things like breeding and raising offspring. That's clearly not affecting juveniles. We might expect juveniles and adults to be driven together by something like a drought or a famine, or something like a migration pattern. Everything will need to go from where it is now to somewhere else. We might expect then to find a group of juveniles and adults together. But that's a mixed group. That doesn't produce juvenile only. So it suggests that there's an alternate explanation for why juveniles hang around together when adults don't, and therefore why we keep finding them as groups. And the most obvious reason for this is actually predation. We know from looking at living animals that predators actively target juveniles. Juveniles are by far and away the most fed upon or targeted offspring. It's virtually one of the first lines of reasoning of Darwin's Origin of Species. More offspring are born than can possibly survive. Where do they all go? Well, the vast majority of them go down the gullets of carnivores, and there's no reason to think that dinosaurs were doing anything differently. So juveniles will cluster together as a defense against carnivory, because vigilance is one of the big things. Juveniles have to spend loads of time looking for food. They're often naive about it, they're looking for food in bad places, they're eating low quality food, and of course they are very vulnerable to predators. And the biggest way of getting over that quickly and effectively is being in a group. At least someone's probably keeping an eye out. Now actually, if you look at depictions of dinosaurs, any kind of artwork and almost any kind of reconstruction or documentary, what you will typically see is Tyrannosaurus trying to eat something like an adult Triceratops. In other words, an animal just as heavy as it is, with horns about this long. This is not an ideal target. This is not what carnivores do generally. What they do is go after the little ones, which are stupid, foraging in the wrong areas, and don't have any horns to defend themselves. This is what you should be doing. And actually, if we look at the fossil record for carnivory, it's what we see. There are numerous numerous incidences of theropods, the carnivorous dinosaurs, either having actively consumed juveniles, like baryonyx with a juvenile inside it, or having attempted to do so. There are several records of young dinosaurs with the teeth of carnivores broken off inside their bones, and the bone having then healed over the top. So they survived a predation attempt. And clearly they were still juveniles after they'd survived that, so it must have occurred at an even younger age. We also see this from healed bite marks, we see it from stomach contents, and we even see it from coprolite. Does anyone want to volunteer what a coprolite is? Several people know. It is fossilised waste. But we see the bones of baby dinosaurs macerated and passed out through these animals. They were eating juveniles. And in contrast, few examples of feeding on adult dinosaurs, which we think happened pre-mortem. There's definite scavenging and feeding on adults, but things that were actively killed or targeted basically don't exist. Now, the discrepancy, the absence of juveniles,